Hi, I'm Bob Flisser, and I want to show you the dozen techniques you should know if you want to use Excel. And all the techniques that I'll give you in this tutorial will work in both the Windows and Mac versions of Excel. And when I give you keyboard shortcuts, I will give you both the Windows and Mac shortcuts. So let's just get started with the first one, the basics of writing a formula. Now, throughout this whole long tutorial, just to make things a little easier for you, I have all of the screens, all of the sheets in one single file that you can download. And you can see the file here is called How to Use Excel, and if you look down on the bottom, we have all of these different sheets. That way you don't have to keep opening and closing files as we go. And we're going to start on the first one here called Simple. This is a very simple worksheet. And the technique of how to write a formula is this. The formula goes in the cell where you want the answer to appear. So here we have some numbers, and I want to add these numbers and put the total in this box. So to put the total in this box, I put the formula in this box. Every formula, every function, always starts off with an equal sign. There's no exception to that. And now all I have to do is select the cells that I want to add and use the plus sign. So I say that cell plus. And I click that cell and type in another plus. And that cell. Now I'm done. I don't type in another plus sign because that means B2 plus B3 plus B4 plus what? So B4 is the last cell that I'm adding. That's it. I'm done. I press the Enter key, and there I have the total. And I'm going to give you a little tip here. You notice that when I press the Enter key to enter the formula, the cursor went down one row. What if I want to enter and stay on that cell? Here, let me just delete that. I'll say equals this plus this plus this. And instead of pressing the Enter key by itself, in Windows, I press Control Enter. Hold the Control key down and press Enter. If you're using the Mac, you hold down the Command key and press Enter. So that way you enter it and you stay there. And by the way, maybe I should have said this before, after you enter any kind of formula or function or write text, you have to hit the Enter key. Until you hit the Enter key, Excel hasn't seen that you've actually done anything. And all of the typical math symbols you're used to working with on pencil and paper work in Excel. So let's say, for example, I have returns. People returned rotten fruit or something. I can say less returns. I'll just type this in. I'll press the Tab key. And let's say there were 2 pieces of rotten fruit that people returned. I'll type in the number 2. So let's take this formula, let's delete it, and then I can say equals this plus this plus this minus this. Hit the Enter key, and these numbers are small enough you can do this in your head. You see that's the correct number. And in the written part of this tutorial, you'll see I put a table showing you what all of the typical math symbols are, so you can refer to that. Okay, let's go to our second technique. And that is, if you want to do a calculation that's a little bit more involved than simple arithmetic, you can use a function. And a function is like pre-made math, like think of doing an average, right? How do you do an average? You add a bunch of numbers and divide by the number of numbers that you added. So there's a function for the average. Excel has about 400 functions, so you'll probably find some that you need. And don't worry, you don't have to know every one of them. There's nobody who needs to know all 400 odd functions. But you'll find them on business, date and time, document info, finance, and more. So let's click on the second sheet called Functions. And what we want to do here is we want to add the number of pounds going down column B, and we want to get an average price per pound that's in column C. Now, before we write any functions, I want to give you the syntax of how they work. You start off with an equal sign, then you have the name of the function, and you have at least one set of parentheses. Usually there's something in the parenthesis. There's a few functions that have empty parentheses, but 99% of them have something in there. So let's use the sum function to add up the number of pounds here in column B. So I'm going to say equals sum. That's the function we're going to use. You notice that Excel gives us a little bit of pop-up help. Let's ignore it for now. So I have the equal sign, I have the name of the function, I open up the parenthesis, and now all I have to do is drag down these numbers. And you notice the marching ants is showing me exactly what it is that I'm about to add. and I'm going to close a parenthesis. By the way, because this is a very simple function with just one opening and one closing parenthesis, Excel would actually close it for me, so closing it is optional, but it's probably good practice to do it. And now I will press Control Enter or Command Enter on the Mac, and there we go. I have that answer. Let's just go over, I'll hit the right arrow key on the keyboard, let's go to the next one, and let's get the average. So the average function works the same way as the sum function. We say equals average, write it out, make sure you spell it correctly, open up the parenthesis, select the numbers going down column C, and here I'll show you, I won't bother closing the parenthesis, I'll press Control Enter or Command Enter, and there we go, I have the average. Something else I'll show you in a little more detail later is if you don't want so many of these decimal places, up here I'm on the Home tab of the ribbon in this number group, so you have all these different little icons. This one here on the end, decrease decimal. Each time I click that, it cuts off one decimal point. If I want more, I can click this one next to it. So whichever you prefer. Now you might wonder, okay, if I know how many pounds of apples I sold and what the price per pound is, I should have a sale number, a total number here, and I should be able to do that going down the column. So yes, we're going to do that, and that's where the third technique comes in. And that technique is called AutoFill, and AutoFill is like a fast, interactive method of copying and pasting. So for that, let's click the third tab here, and this tab is AutoFill, and this is what we had before. Actually, let's put in the price per pound, a little bit of practice, equals average, and select all of this. Okay, and if you want to decrease that. So let's go over here into D2, and we're going to multiply number of pounds times price per pound. So you'll say equals that times, you want to use the asterisk to multiply, times that, and again I'll press Control Enter or Command Enter. Now that's great, but I don't want to do this manually for every single product going down the line. I want to take this and I want to copy and paste the formula all the way down so that it's not going to tell me the result of apple pounds times apple price for each one, and each one is going to be 30. That wouldn't make sense. I want to copy and paste the formula kind of in general terms and let Excel adjust which two numbers it's going to multiply based on the row. That's where AutoFill comes into play. Now, we just did this formula here in cell D2. Take a look in the lower right corner here. And notice in the lower right corner, we have this little heavy dot. And normally the mouse pointer is this big old plus sign, but as soon as I roll the mouse pointer over that heavy dot, you see the mouse pointer becomes a crosshair? So this is a regular pointer, this is the crosshair. When you get that crosshair, click and drag down to the bottom, and now Excel copies and pastes the formula. Actually, I'm going to undo that. I'll press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac, and because I don't have any blank rows here, in addition to dragging down, when I get that crosshair, I can double click, and it automatically fills down until it finds the first blank row. Let's actually take a look what's going on here. Here's the original one, B2 times C2. The next one, you notice it's still B times C, but it adjusts the row from row 2 to row 3. And this one, B4 to C4, and B5 to C5, and so on. Also, one of my favorite Excel shortcuts, if you want to see all of the formulas all at the same time, instead of having to click each individual one and look up there, is if you look on your keyboard, to the left of the number 1 and above the tab key is a key with a little accent mark on it. If you press Control accent mark, that shows you all of the formulas all at once. Okay, let's look at our next technique. And that is you can arrange your data by filtering and sorting. In the worksheet, let's click on the next tab, Filter and Sort. So here we have a typical list of names and addresses and phone numbers and all that. Let's say I want to sort by last name. What I do is I click anywhere inside the last name column. Here I'm on the Home tab, and over here on the right in the editing group, you see it says Sort and Filter. Click that and I can sort A to Z, or I can click in there and sort Z to A. Maybe I want to sort by state. I can click in State, and the same thing. So Alaska is on top, all the way down to Wyoming is on bottom, Or I can sort by zip code, the same thing. Notice it's smart enough to recognize these are numbers, smallest to largest, or largest to smallest. We can also filter. Going down through here, let's say, and you see all these different states, maybe I want to show only California. Let's start with that. So I'll click somewhere in the state. By the way, notice that for all the sorting and filtering, I am not selecting a column. If I select a column and I sort, I'm going to sort that column independently of all the other columns, and that'll ruin the data. So staying in here, we're going over here to where it says sort and filter. Click this filter button, and notice we get these little drop-down arrows on each column. So I'll click this one for state. Notice all of the states are selected, and where it says select all, I'll click that to clear the checkbox. Select California, click OK, and now I have only California. What if I want California and maybe just one other state? Again, I'll click that filter button, and maybe I also want to see, I don't know, let's scroll down here. Maybe I also want to see Idaho. So I'll click there, click OK, and I see California and Idaho only. So as much as I want, let's try maybe Delaware. So as much as I want, I can add, there's Delaware in addition to Idaho, I can add or subtract states from this filter list. Notice that because it's filtered, the little button symbol changes. Let me click that again. If I want to unfilter it, if I want to see all of the states, there's two things I can do. One is where it says select all, I can click that, or I could click where it says clear filter. And by the way, you can sort a filtered list. So let's go back in here, and maybe I'll just choose Alaska because it's right up there at the top. And now that Alaska is the only state that's showing it's filtered out, I can now go into the last name column, and now I can sort A to Z. So that way I can sort in addition to filtering. If you decide, okay, you're done, you want to get rid of all of these little symbols, you want to get your file back to showing you everything, again, go back to sort and filter, and then you can clear. And if you still have the symbols up, you could go back to filter and clear that as well. So let's go on to the fifth technique. Technique number 5 is that you can use Excel to remove duplicate rows, remove duplicate data. In our workbook, let's go to the next worksheet, remove duplicates. Now, when you have a long list of names and addresses, it's very hard to see what's duplicated and what's not. But I set this up, so I want to show you exactly what you're going to see. Let's scroll down here into the 20s, and you notice that we have 3 rows. I'll just select them here. We have Samantha Carter is listed 3 times, and you can see the same address and all of that. So you know that this is the same exact person, for whatever reason, is listed 3 times. Now if we scroll down a little bit more, you'll see we have these 2 records. Sharon Valeri is listed twice, but notice different addresses and different everything. So this just happens to be 2 different people of the same name, so you don't want to remove one of them because these really are not duplicates. Okay, so let's go up to the top here. So make sure you're selected somewhere in the table. Let's go to the Data tab of the ribbon. And over here you see we have the Data Tools group, and we've got this option for Remove Duplicates. Click that. And let me move this out of the way. Here's what this is all about. Stretch this out if you need to. Excel is telling you, okay, we'll remove duplicates, but define what is a duplicate. Is a duplicate if all of these fields are selected, or is it a duplicate if maybe only some of them are the same? So maybe if these fields are the same, but there's different ZEP phones and credit limits, Excel will still treat them as duplicates and it'll still remove them. I'm going to select all of these here. And of course you can choose select all or unselect all as you need. My data has headers. That's how Excel understands first name and last name and all that because it's coming from row 2. Click OK. It tells us that 2 duplicate values were removed. Click OK. Let's scroll down and see what happened. So you notice that there is now only 1 Samantha Carter. The 2 duplicates were removed, but Sharon Valeri is left because these other fields were different. By the way, if you run a mailing list and you have a lot of email addresses, this is a really great tool to use for that. Okay, let's go on to our 6th technique, and that is how do we take data from one column and separate it into multiple columns? So in our Excel file, let's go to the next tab, splitting. By the way, if you're running out of room, if you don't see all of the tabs here, there's a couple of things you could do. You notice over here where the mouse pointer is, you've got these little dots. You can click and drag. This way you can take that horizontal scroll bar, make it bigger, make it smaller. But here's what's even better, is over here in the lower left corner, you see these little arrows, so you can go forward and backward through the list. Notice it's not choosing a different worksheet, it's just scrolling the list. And if you want, click the right mouse button. And when you do that, it shows you a list here of the tabs, and you can just double click to get to the one you want. Let's go back here. So what we want to do is we want to take this first name column and split it into two columns for first name and last name. Now, most of these names are just first name and last name, but there's a few that have middle names. So what we need to make sure that we don't lose any data, we want to add two blank columns. So put your mouse pointer up here on the header for column B. You notice the mouse pointer is a downward pointing arrow. Click and drag to the right, so we have two columns selected. Then right click somewhere on one of these headers, and from the pop-up menu choose Insert. So that inserts two blank columns. Now let's select column A. Click the first one, and if you want, you can click and drag down to the bottom, or what I'll do is in Windows I will press Control, Shift, and the down arrow key. That selects all the way to the bottom. If you're on the Mac, you can press Command, Shift, down arrow. Okay, so let's go up to the top here. And we want to stay on the Data tab. And you see where it says Text to Columns? Click that. Let's drag this out of the way. And this gives you a choice. Are your data separated? Are they delimited, meaning there's something in between, like a space or a tab or a comma? Or are they fixed width? That's kind of rare. That's if every column of data has the same exact number of characters. So we're going to choose delimited, click Next. Now, we're not separated with tabs. That's why this isn't showing you very much. I'm going to deselect tab. I'll click space. Now it understands what's going on. And let's say maybe there's some typos. Maybe there's, in some of these, there's like two spaces in between the first and last name. Excel will treat them as one. It'll ignore them. But if we scroll down the sample, notice here's where we start getting weird things because we got those three names. We'll fix that. Click Next. Nothing really much to do here. Click Finish. So now it's, most of them, it's split, first name and last name, but a few of these we have to fix manually. So you might have to come in here, fix that. Now, where's the next one? Well, you can scroll down, or if it's a long list, you can press Control down arrow, or on the Mac, you can press Command down arrow. And then, again, you can find them. I think there's only about 3 of them in here. There we go. That's the last one. We're down at the bottom of the sheet. So now we know that column C is completely empty. Put your mouse pointer on the top of column C, click the right mouse button and delete. And now we can maybe change this. Double click on the cell and edit it. And we'll call this first name. Hit the tab key. We'll call this last name. Okay, that's great, but what if you want to go in the reverse direction? Maybe you have 2 columns of first name and last name and you want to combine them into a single column. That's where we go to our 7th technique. How do we use Excel to join multiple columns into a single column? So let's go to the 7th tab here for joining. And this is basically the same thing that we just saw. So here's what you want to do. Let's insert a new column. Put your mouse pointer on the header for column C. You notice the mouse pointer is this downward pointing arrow. Click the right mouse button, insert, and let's go up here and let's call this full name. And we're going to use a simple formula. Now, I showed you earlier that when you add, you use the plus sign, but if you simply want to attach what they call concatenate one to the other, and we're dealing with text, not numbers anyway, you use an ampersand. Also, we're going to do this a little incorrectly first. You'll see what the problem is, and then we'll go in and we'll fix it. So I'm going to say equals this first name, type in an ampersand, that's on the number 7 on your keyboard, shift and number 7, first name and the last name, but when I enter it, see the first and last names are squished. We need an empty space there. So let's delete that. And we're going to have one minor little difference. So again, let's say equals that first name ampersand, and now open up a double quotation mark, type a space, close the double quotation mark. That tells Excel, hey, literally insert a space. You have to have these in between double quotation marks, because if you just type space on with a space bar without them, Excel just isn't going to recognize you want a space. And now another ampersand, and now the last name. So we're telling Excel, take cell A3 and add an empty space and add B3. I'll press Control Enter. There it is. Put the mouse pointer on the AutoFill dot. I'll double click. And now as we scroll down, we can see these are all filled in. One thing you might want to do though, is you notice that when we put these in, these are still formulas, right? So each one of these, or if I press Control accent mark, or on Windows or Mac, Control, you notice we have just these formulas. What if you want actual text? Because maybe you want to get rid of column A and B, and you just want that. We have to convert these formulas into the actual data. Here's how you do that. Click the first one, and again, I'll press Control Shift down arrow, or on the Mac, Command Shift down arrow. Copy. I'll just press Control C or Command C on the Mac. Want to go to the Home tab, click the down arrow under the Paste button, and you see we have all kinds of different methods of pasting. We want this where it says Paste Values and that 1, 2, 3. That means we're going to take the actual values and paste the values on top of the formulas. Click that. I'll just hit the Escape key, get rid of the marching ants, and now you notice that there are no more formulas. So these are actual data, which means if you want, you can delete column A and B, and you'll still have the results. So let's go on to our 8th technique, and that is quick formatting of numbers and worksheets. So we'll go on to the Formatting tab, and I generally look at Excel as having number formatting is kind of different from like color and font formatting. First thing is, let's zoom out here if we need so we can see everything. So let's do this. I want to take this first row and I want to make this dollar signs, but not the percent. We're going to deal that later. And then down below we have that total. So I'm just using the wheel on the mouse to scroll. So once I have that selected, I'm going to hold down the Control key and select these, or the Command key on the Mac. That way you can select multiple cells that are not contiguous. Let's make sure you can see all of them at the same time. And now up here, we're on the Home tab. You have dollar formatting. And it gives you dollar signs, gives you commas for 1,000 separators, but it also gives us decimals. We don't need those decimals. So you remember this button from earlier. I'll click that a couple of times and get rid of them. By the way, the shortcut for getting the dollar format is Control-Shift $sign. Now these numbers in between, we want 1,000 separators, but we don't want dollar signs. That's called comma formatting. So let's select all of these numbers here. And you can press Control-Shift exclamation mark or click comma. And now let's get rid of these decimals. There's no shortcut for those. Let's scroll over here and we've got our percentages. So we'll take these decimals, convert them into percentages, select them all. You can press Control-Shift %, or you can click on that percent symbol, and if maybe you want 1 or 2 decimals, you can click those. For formatting, let's go back so we can see column A. Again, I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. We don't have to read the whole thing. We just need to be able to see what's going on. And if I want to format, let's say, these column headers here without really thinking about it too much, when I have them selected, I go over here to Cell Styles, and now I can apply a style. Notice that gives me a font and a color and all that. And for the row headers, same thing. I can select those, go into Cell Style, and maybe give them something like that. Or maybe I want Excel to format the whole thing for me. So I'm going to undo twice. I'll press Control-Z twice, or on the Mac, Command-Z, and then click somewhere in here, and we'll go over here where it says Format as Table, and notice you have a whole bunch of options here, and I will choose one. Excel says, yeah, that's the area you want to format. It's leaving out that total row. I can add that if I want. Click OK, and there it is. If I want to get rid of these filter buttons, what I could do is right over here. Notice it puts me into this Design tab. I can uncheck the filter buttons. And then I can still apply local formatting if I want. Maybe I want to take this total row And let's go back here to cell styles, and I want to give this its own style. Okay, let's go on to our 9th technique. Manipulating columns and rows and page breaks and worksheets, all of that stuff all in one. So let's go to rows and columns. Again, if you don't see the rows and columns tab there, you can click these little buttons here. Let's go to rows and columns. Changing the widths of columns and the height of rows are pretty much the same thing. They work the same way. Let's say, for example, November, because that's a long name. If you put your mouse pointer on the boundary here between these two columns, you notice the mouse pointer becomes this two-headed arrow. It has to be on the headers. It can't be in the worksheet, can't be on column A. It has to be there. You can click and drag to make the column wider, click and drag to make the column narrower. Or let's say maybe if the column is way too narrow, you'll see the pound signs. That's Excel's way of saying, hey, there's stuff there about too narrow to show you. If you put your mouse pointer up there so you get that two-headed arrow, double click, that makes the column exactly as wide as the widest item in the list. And you could still modify it. Row height is the same thing. Maybe let's go over here. And I can drag down or drag up to make the row taller or shorter. I also double click to make the row optimal height. I'll show you a couple of ways of manipulating page breaks. Let's say I want a page break after Clementine. So I'll click here on Grapefruit, go to Page Layout. Over here where it says breaks, I'll click that and insert a page break. And you notice there's this little page break. Now, to manipulate them, if you take a look here down in the corner, you've got these three little icons here. This third one is Page Break Preview. Click that, and this shows you. First of all, dotted lines, these are automatic page breaks because that's just the size of the page. The solid lines are the manual page breaks. So maybe instead of in front of Clementines, here, let's zoom in. Maybe I want it after grapes. I can put my mouse pointer there. You notice I got that two-headed arrow mouse pointer, and I can just drag that. Maybe I want this automatic page break to be between May and June, and I do that so I make the page narrower. But of course, that makes this page a little wider, so Excel inserts an automatic page break. And you could do everything in Excel in Page Break Preview that you normally do. You can go and edit cells and formulas and functions and all that. A little difficult to do because of all of the stuff that's in your way. So when you're done, you might want to go back to normal view here. Now, as far as the worksheets themselves are concerned, let's say I want to add a brand new worksheet. See down over here, we've got this plus sign. If I click that plus sign, I have a brand new worksheet. Now, sheet 12 isn't a meaningful name. If I want a different name, I can simply double click it and give it a name and press enter when you're done. If you want to delete a worksheet that you don't need, put your mouse pointer on it, right click, and from the pop-up menu, choose delete. And it's gone. Now, if you want to move these around, put your mouse pointer on the tab itself, click and hold down the mouse pointer, and notice the mouse pointer changes to a little sheet of paper on there, and you see there's that little upside down arrow. You could drag along forwards or back. Wherever that little down arrow is when you let go, that's where the worksheet gets deposited. If you want to duplicate, hold the Control key down or the Command key on the Mac, and now you see there's a little plus sign on the mouse pointer, and now when you drag and let go, it gives you a duplicate, and the duplicate is always going to have that number 2, because you can't have two worksheets of the same name in the same workbook. And I'll just right-click that and delete, and it says, hey, there's really data, so this time it confirms because it's not a blank sheet, and yes, I will delete. There is no limit to the number of worksheets you can have in one workbook. As many as you want is fine. So let's go on to the 10th technique, and that is keeping column headers visible. And this is both on the worksheet when you're editing it and also when you do a printout. So let's go on to the 10th sheet, which is headers. And I'll zoom out here a little bit. And we're not going to edit anything on this sheet, but take a look. As we scroll down, and here we have our column headers across row 2. As you scroll down, you lose them. And kind of, this is simple and it's obvious, that you have first name and last name and all that, but maybe you have a lot of columns that are similar, maybe columns with all kinds of numbers in there and you can't tell which is which. Let's scroll up to the top. Here's what you want to do. I'll click just below, on the first row, below the column headers. And let's go over here to the View tab on the ribbon, and you see where it says Freeze Panes. Click the down arrow, choose Freeze Panes. You may notice this little thin line underneath that column, underneath that row 2. Now scroll down. You can scroll down as far as you want. You can see how far we've gone down there on the headers, and that's always in view. If you want to unfreeze it, go back to Freeze Panes and choose Unfreeze Panes, and now you're back to normal. But that's only for editing. That has nothing to do with when you're printing out. Let's see how this will look when printed before we do anything else. Now you could press Control-P or Command-P on the Mac for the print screen, or you could go to the File tab and then over here to Print. Here's Print Preview. And you can see we've got 22 pages. And as you go through here, look at that. You can't tell what column is what. So just hit the Escape key or click that left arrow. And what we want to do is tell Excel that these first 2 rows should be printed on every sheet. So go to Page Layout, and you see over here where it says Print Titles is in the Page Setup area. Click Print Titles, and you see where it says Rows to Repeat at top. Click in there. Let's select these first 2 rows. Notice you've got row 1 and 2 in there. Click OK. This has nothing to do with editing because I can still scroll these out of view. I'd still need to freeze panes if necessary. But when we go into that print screen here, notice there's our headers. And as we go forward on our pages, we still see all of those headers. So let's go on to the 11th technique. And that is using the if function to make the value of a cell depend on something else that's happening somewhere. And let me start off by giving you the syntax of the if function. You say equals if, and then in the parenthesis there are 3 arguments. And whenever you have multiple arguments in a function, you separate them with commas. So the first argument is the condition you're testing for. And it's kind of like a statement. You're saying, okay, here's something. Is B10 equal to 100? And if B10 is equal to 100, well, it's true or it's false. So if the condition you're testing for is true, the value that the if function gives you is going to be whatever you put in the second argument. If that condition turns out to be false, then the if function will give you whatever it is you put in as the third argument. So let's go into the 11th sheet here, which is the if worksheet. So here we have some sales information, and we have people from all different states who are placing orders. And some of the states are New Jersey, and some of them are not. And you see over here in column H, we have a tax column. So what we want to do is we want to say that anytime an order is placed from New Jersey, we have to charge 7% sales tax. If the order is coming from anywhere else other than New Jersey, there is no sales tax. And we don't just want to say, hey, it's 7%. We don't want just the 7% coming in column H. We actually want the value of the tax. So let's start over here in the very first one. And you notice that's Missouri, so we aren't going to charge sales tax here, but we still will have the function. So we say equals if, open up the parenthesis, and you see it's giving us that syntax that I just showed you. So we're going to say equals if that equals NJ. Now, because it's text, we have to put it in double quotes. So I'll open up a double quote, type NJ. It's not case sensitive, but you do have to have the quotation marks. So that's a condition we're testing. We're saying, hey, C3 equals NJ, true or false. So we put in a comma, and if it's true, we need to specify 7% times the sale. So we're going to say the sale times, right, we use the asterisk, times 0.07. Or if you want to say 7%, whatever you like, comma. Now, if it's false that this particular cell, that cell C3 is NJ, we don't want anything in there. Now, I don't want to put in a 0 because then we're going to have a whole lot of zeros going down the column. It's going to look messy. So I just want literally nothing in there. I want an empty cell. So I'm going to open up a double quote and immediately close a double quote. Don't type in a space because then you're going to have a bunch of spaces in there and that can cause trouble. So we just want empty. And then just close the parenthesis. That's it. I'll press Control Enter, put the mouse pointer on the AutoFill dot and double click. And look at that. Most of these are blank, but here we can see there's sales tax because that's NJ. Here there's sales tax because that's NJ. And you notice all the way down, most of these are blank because they're not NJ, but anywhere there is NJ in that column C, you have a value there. So let's go on to our 12th and final technique, which kind of dovetails on this. And that is, there's two functions, very similar, called SUMIF and AVERAGEIF, and these will add or average depending on a condition. So it's kind of like the if function that's kicked up a notch. Let me give you the syntax here. We say equals SUMIF, and then we have three arguments. The first argument is a range that we're going to look in for the condition, comma. The second condition is what value we're going to pick. Like in the example we just did, you might look in the state range, and then the value to pick would be NJ. And then the third argument is once you've cherry-picked those rows that you want, where are you going to add? What column of that row are you going to throw into adding? So SUMIF, that's the SUMIF function. The AVERAGEIF function, the syntax is the same exact thing, except it's equals AVERAGEIF instead of equals SUMIF. So let's go to the 12th and last sheet, which is SUMIF. And you notice we got two boxes here where we're going to put in our functions. So like we saw previously, we have all these orders coming from all these different states. We want to add all of the orders that are in California. So let's say here we have a row that's in California. We want to take that and we want to add that to any of the other rows that come from California. But we want to ignore Ohio and Florida and all the others. And then over here, we want to take an average of Kona. So we have all these coffee varieties, but we just want an average of Kona, and we want to ignore Columbia and Blue Mountain and all that. So let's go in here into G203. And we'll start off, we'll say equals SUMIF, open the parenthesis. So the range that we're looking for, because remember we want to start by identifying the state, is this column that has all the states. So let's scroll to the top, click the first one, scroll down and hold the shift key down and click the last one. So that says, okay, let's look in this range, comma, and in this range we want to cherry pick California. So in quotes, you have to remember to do that in quotes, otherwise it's going to give you an error. CA, it's not case sensitive, close the quote. So in that column, wherever you find CA, comma, let's add. Where do we want to add? We want to add from column G. Let's go up to the top here, click the first one, scroll down to the bottom and shift click that last one, and that's it. Close the parenthesis. So SUMIF, we're going to look in column C. Wherever you see in column C, it says CA, grab that, and then add from whatever happens to be in column G. Enter that, and now that's the total orders to California. So now let's use the AVERAGEIF function to find the average order of Kona. So syntax is the same thing as I said. We say equals AVERAGEIF, open up the parenthesis. Now this time the range instead of column C is going to be column D. So let's scroll up to the top, choose the first coffee there, scroll down to the bottom, click the last one. So that's the range we're going to look in to start, comma, wherever we find Kona. So we open up the quotation marks, type Kona. Again, it's not case sensitive, but you have to spell it right. Close the quotation mark, comma. So wherever you find Kona in column D, we want to add, or I'm sorry, we want to average what? We want to average what's in column G. So again, start with the first one, scroll down, shift click the last one, close the parenthesis, I'll control enter or command enter on the Mac, and there we go. So we know that the average order of Kona coffee is about $83.40. So if you want to play around with this on your own and get some practice, maybe find the total orders of Florida, or the average order to Ohio, or the total orders of Blue Mountain, and so on. And then I think you'll get the hang of it. So I hope you found these dozen techniques helpful. I think they'll really kick up your Excel prowess. And once again, my name is Bob Flisser. Happy excelling, and I will see you next time.